Welcome to another Hayley-Roxanna crafts video. In this video I'm going to show you 4 methods for securing your thread when you start cross stitching. Starting with the method that I most commonly use. So method 1 is starting with a knot. So starting with a knot can be a little bit controversial within the cross stitching community. But it was the way I was taught, and I have never found having the knot to secure my thread at the start has had a negative impact on my finished cross stitching pieces. But if you really don't want any knots on the back of your work, then this method probably isn't for you. My other 3 methods may be more suitable. However, if you're not bothered by having knots on the back of your work, I'm going to show you how I make them as unobtrusive as possible. So I start with the number of strands of thread that I need. So 1, 2, 3 up to the 6, whatever. I've got 2 strands to show you for today. And you want to start by making sure that your strands are level at the one end, like so, and then go down to the other end to pop your knot in. And I do my knot by just wrapping it over my finger like so. So I've got a cross, then folding that end bit over, and then I just use my needle to hold that on my finger as I pull through, pull the loop off, and then you just pull that tight. And then so that you can get the knot as near to the end of your thread as possible, I just use the needle to guide it down as low as I can. You just have to be careful you don't go and pull it all the way off the end. Grab hold of your ends as you pull it tight like so, and just keep easing it down so you haven't got too much excess on the end, like so. And if you find you've got a bit too much, you can always chop it off with your scissors, because you really don't want a long tail after the knot, because it can get in the way and ruin your work then. But yeah, just sort of like so, and then thread your needle up. And then you can start stitching. So you come through then from the back of your work where you want your first cross, like so, and then you're just going to pull it through, and you just got to take care that you don't pull too hard and pull the knot all the way through. You make sure you stop, and then you can continue with your stitches like so. You might find if you are using, say, 1 strand of thread, or if you've got a larger count of fabric so the holes are slightly bigger, you may need to just double knot the end. To do that, I just use the needle to guide the second knot over the top of the first to make it that little bit thicker. But you want to make the knots as small as you possibly can, but obviously they need to be large enough to not come through the holes. So it's just getting that balance, and then you can do your stitches. Okay, and the other thing you need to watch if you're starting with a knot is that if you are stitching through the hole where the knot is, especially when you need to come up through that hole, so say I was coming up here to start a stitch, you just need to make sure that you don't go and push the hole through, that you make sure that needle goes under the hole when you put it in for the second time, and then just take care pulling it through, that you don't actually pull that knot back through, because you don't want it to suddenly appear on the front of your work. Okay, and then you can just carry on stitching till you've finished what you're doing. Method 2 is starting with a waist knot. So although this method starts with a knot, the knot is actually cut off once you've completed a few stitches and the thread is secure. Okay, so again, I'm doing this with 2 strands, but you can do it with any number of strands of your thread again. You just make your knot in the end like we did before. The excess thread after the knot doesn't really matter this time. You don't need to cut that off if you've got a bit more than what you'd want, but you don't want to be wasting thread. So again, if you can get the knot as near to the end as possible, it does help with reducing your waste. Now this time we're going to put the needle in at the front of the work, and you want to put it in about 4 to 6 squares away from where you want your first cross stitch to be. It does depend on which way you stitch as to whereabouts you need to put it. So if we stitch from left to right like I do, then you'd want to put it 4 to 6 squares to the right of where you're starting. Okay, so if I'd pop it there. If you stitch going the other way from right to left, then you'd want to pop the needle down on the left hand side of where you're starting. Okay, so if I pull mine down like so, like I said, this is the front of the work, so just take care not to put it all the way through again, because obviously that's not going to help. And then you can go to where you want your first stitch. So if I say I want it here, and pull that through, and then as you're stitching, so it looks like that on the back, you do your normal on the front, but then as you come back through from the other side to do the second stitch, you just want to make sure that you're going over that little bit of travelling thread on the back, like so. Okay, and then once you have done probably 4 to 6 stitches, so if I just continue like so, so I'm just catching that excess, pull it down, and I just keep flipping, looking on the back just to make sure I'm going over it. Just secure it like so. So I'm now getting close to where my knot is. Okay, like that. And now that's been secured on the back, so I can just take a pair of scissors and very carefully just hold it up. Okay, you may want to use a smaller pair of scissors than these just to make sure. Watch your thread that you're still using, and you're just going to chop off the knot. Having trouble doing it because I've got a large pair of scissors. Let me try that again. Okay, I've chopped off the knot. Okay, and then you just want to make sure that that little bit of excess from the front is just gently pulled through to the back. So if I just give that a little nudge, it'll go through like so, and then you can just carry on stitching, either carry on going this way or back over your stitches, whatever, and that is nice and secure. With this method, one thing you do need to watch is when you are cutting that knot off, that you don't go and accidentally cut any of your other threads that might be nearby, or you accidentally cut through the fabric. So again, you might want a smaller pair of scissors than what I was trying to use. You also need to be aware that this method may not be suitable if you are using a dark thread on light fabric or a light thread on dark fabric, as this can leave a sort of visible shadow or mark on the front of your work once you've snipped it off. So actually on this piece of fabric I'm using, you can see where I've used some black thread before, where I've unstitched it, because it's left a bit of a mark. So that's something you could get once you've snipped off the knot with where the excess thread is as you poke it back through. So it's just something to be aware of, to decide whether it's a suitable way of securing your thread when you're starting your cross stitching. So the third method is starting with a buried thread. So this method is actually similar to the waist knot method, but without the knot. So it can be used if you are using a darker thread on light fabric or a lighter thread on dark fabric, as you don't have that issue with the potential mark or shadow on the front of your work when you've cut off the knot. Literally with this method, you are burying the thread under the first few stitches. Okay, so you're going to thread your needle up with your thread, no knot on the end, and then just insert from the back to the front where you want your first stitch to start. And then as you pull it through, you just want to make sure that you're leaving a tail on the back of your work. Okay, it doesn't have to be very long, a couple of inches, inch and a half, just like that. Then as you do your first few stitches, we're going to catch that tail under the thread at the back. So on the front you do your stitch as normal, and then as you turn it over to insert it back to do the next stitch, you just want to make sure that that excess thread is going to be caught under the stitch on the back. And you can just give it a little pull back to make sure it's in the right place. You do have to be careful as you're doing your first few stitches that you don't go and pull too tight and end up pulling that excess bit of thread through. Okay, so again on the back, just make sure you're catching that bit of thread. And then once you have done 4 to 6 stitches, catching that little bit of thread, to make sure that it's secured, it's not going to come undone. Like so. You can then just snip off any extra that you've not caught and just carry on stitching as you go. You do need to be careful that as you're passing the needle through from the back to the front, that you are going over this thread, you're not pushing into it, you're not going to push it through the holes and into the front. It's just practice and taking a bit of care, and the first few stitches may take you a little bit longer to do than the rest of the work, but as long as that thread is secure, that's the most important thing. Okay, and then like I said, cut off any excess, so again you don't go catching it while you're doing the rest of your stitches and pulling it through and giving it a bad look on the front because you've got extra bits of thread sticking up. And my fourth method is starting with a loop start. So this method can only be used if you need an even number of strands for making your crosses. So 2, 4 or 6 strands. This is because you actually only take half the number of strands you need and double your thread up. So I'm going to do it as though I am stitching for, I need 2 strands of thread, as that's what's most commonly used. So I only need 1 strand from the 6 in my floss. Okay. If you were needing to use 4 strands for your crosses, then you take 2 strands, and if you need 6, you take 3 strands. Now normally if I was using this method, I would actually cut my thread a bit longer, so twice the length I normally would. So I normally say you want about 50 centimeters of your thread, so I'd probably cut about 1 meter for this method. Okay, because what you're actually going to do to get the 2 strands is we're going to double up your thread. Okay, so you just want to find the 2 ends like so, and then just try to get them as level as possible. Okay, and then you want to thread your needle on those 2 strands on the 2 ends and totally miss like I've just done. So we try that again. Okay, wiggle them through, there you go. So you've got both ends through your needle. Okay, and pull it down slightly, and then insert your needle where you want to start that first cross, like so. And as you pull it through, you just want to leave that end at the back, so you've got a little bit extra there, and then you go down as you normally would for that first stitch, but then as you come through on the back, you want to make sure, mine's actually done it for me, that you've gone through the loop at the end of your thread. So if I just pull it back like that so you can see, okay, so it's like that, and then you just want to catch that end like so and pull it down, and that has then secured your thread, and then you can just carry on stitching as normal. Okay, I'll show you what it looks like on the back. Okay, so you just got that little bit where you've caught the thread, but that's now secured, that's not going anywhere, and there's no knots. This is actually a method that I do quite like, and I will use this method when I am stitching two pieces of fabric together by hand as well, because when you're doing that, the knot tends to pull through your fabric and then your pieces can become, you know, can separate again. And I usually use double the sewing thread when I'm actually hand stitching anything, just for that little bit of extra security. So it's a good method for that, as well as for stitching, securing your thread at the start of your cross stitching. And that's the 4 methods for securing your thread when you start cross stitching that I know of. If you know of any others, please feel free to pop them in the comments below. The method you choose to use can be any that you like, as long as you are happy and comfortable using it. Sometimes one method may be more appropriate than another, depending on what thread you're using and the fabric, and what you're going to be doing with your finished cross stitch piece. I'll pop some links to the supplies that I've used in this video below, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. In my next video, I will show you some different methods of securing your thread when you finish cross stitching. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.